For years, Morocco had been regarded as one of North Africa's most stable countries, but the silence behind that stability was broken in autumn 2025. The deaths of 8 women after childbirth in a public hospital in Agadir echoed nationwide. This tragedy revealed not only the weaknesses of the healthcare system, but also the limits of society's patience. Images circulating on social media, shared millions of times under the hashtag "and Morocco is hurting," made long-suppressed anger visible. Why did a generation rise up precisely at this moment? Why did young people, who had been silent for years, choose to speak now? Perhaps the answer lies in a new identity forged by the digital age. Morocco's young population grew up with the internet. They are a generation who know the world through their screens. For Gen Z, the world is not limited to the streets of their cities, but is also a vast network that lives on digital platforms like TikTok, Twitter, and Discord. For them, the digital world is not just entertainment, but a space for identity, expression, and struggle. Rising unemployment, an outdated education system, inadequate health services, and corruption allegations eroded young people's hope. Could the state's promises of reform still be credible? Or were these promises just a way to prolong the silence? Protests that started after the Agadir incident quickly spread across the country. Thousands of young people poured into the streets of Rabat, Casablanca, Oujda, Tangier, and Saleh. Organized under the slogan Gen Z 212, the movement had no clear leader. No one was giving orders. Everyone was raising their own voice. Thus, no pressure or bans could suppress the spirit of the movement. The slogans were different, but their meaning was the same. Education is our right. Health is not a luxury, it is life. We want our future. Police interventions were harsh in many cities. Deaths occurred in clashes in Leclerc, and hundreds were detained. As events escalated, a question echoed in people's minds. Is this a new Arab Spring in Morocco, or just a temporary youth uprising? When the streets were silenced, protests moved to digital platforms. Short videos spreading on TikTok showed the anger and hope of young people to the world. Social media became Morocco's new public square. Every tweet, every post was a cry. The government slowed down the internet and blocked some platforms, but young people found their voices again through VPNs and alternative networks. Digital silence gave way to digital resistance. A nation was now speaking from their screens. But can a digital rebellion really bring about physical change? The demands of the youth became increasingly clear. Strengthening of healthcare services, reform in education, more employment opportunities, fighting corruption, independence of justice, all were different faces of the same question. Can this system carry our future? Initially, Morocco's government underestimated the movement, but as the protests grew, their rhetoric changed. At the prime ministry level, statements emphasized dialogue and announced increased budgets for health and education and support for youth initiatives. Still, young people reacted cautiously to these words because most promises made before had never materialized. While the government called for talks with youth, at the same time it maintained control through detentions and internet restrictions. This contradiction further eroded trust among young people. But this time, something was different. The wall of fear had been broken. A fearless generation had been born. And this generation was becoming not only a symbol of hope for their own country, but for the entire region. International media quickly focused on the events in Morocco. Al Jazeera, AP, and BBC described the protests as Gen Z's first major national resistance. The United Nations and international human rights organizations criticized the disproportionate use of force by security forces. The European Union said, "The peaceful protest rights of Morocco's youth must be protected." As outside attention grew, internal pressure increased too. Amid this balance, one question echoed. If a state loses its youth, who can safeguard its future? The protests were not just a political call, but a cultural awakening. Gen Z was building its own identity between traditional values and the liberating spirit of the modern world. Street art, music, digital content became languages of resistance. This movement was growing not as rage against the regime, but as a demand for the future. The role of women was decisive in this transformation. After the tragedy in Agadir, women became the most powerful symbol of the protests. The slogan, "Our bodies, our rights," echoed in the squares. Women were no longer just victims, but carriers of change. The silenced voice of society was speaking this time at its loudest. A generation was armed with knowledge. Every video, every document, every story spread across the world within seconds. Censorship was weak against this speed, but the power brought by information also carried responsibility. The line between digital freedom and digital chaos was thin. Gen Z was learning to walk that line. When the protests calmed, a new social consciousness remained. Now every young person believed their own voice had meaning. This movement became not so much a political achievement, but a revolution of awareness. No one was just an ordinary citizen anymore. Everyone was a part of their own future. After the events, the government established reform commissions, proposing some structural changes. However, young people wanted not reforms, but participation. They now refused to remain outside the decisions taken at the tables. As the debate over whether real change would come from the streets or from the negotiating tables continued, the future of the country was being shaped in the hands of the digital generation. Amidst all this pressure, conflict, and hope, one thing was clear. This movement was born not out of fear, but out of hope. The youth now knew they weren't alone. Though they came from different cities and backgrounds, they shared the same dream, to live without fear and build an equal society. Maybe history books won't call this a revolution, but every great change starts with awareness, and Morocco's youth have ignited that awareness. Today, the streets may look quiet, but that silence is no longer one of fear. It is the silence of anticipation. The country stands on the brink of change. The youth have turned their digital quiet into a cry. And that cry echoed not only in Morocco, but around the world. A generation called out to their country, their future, their people. Because a country can only stand with its youth, and a future becomes real only if it is walked together. If you want to discover the real reasons behind such social awakenings, don't forget to like our video, subscribe to our channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. How do you evaluate the digital resistance and hopes for the future of Morocco's youth? Gen Z, Morocco is hurting.